Okay, we have a TED Talk expert to come up on the stage shortly with us. Julian Treasure is the founder and chairman of the Sound Agency, which is a UK-based audio branding consultancy that asks and answers the question, how does your brand sound? For 10 years, the Sound Agency has been proving that good sound is good business for clients such as Harrods, IKEA, BP, and many other major shopping malls across Europe. His book, The Sound Business, is the seminal work on creating intentional, effective business sound. He's been widely featured as a sound and communications expert on the world's radio, print, and web media, including the Time magazine and The Economist and the Times. Julian is the sought-after top-rated international speaker. We're really pleased to have him with us here. Collectively, his 4 TED Talks on various aspects of sound and communication have been viewed by an estimated 7 million times. His talk on the conscious listening is in the rare group that have achieved over 1.5 million views on TED.com, putting it on the top 100 TED Talks of all time. Please welcome Julian Treasure.
Well, thank you, David, and it's absolutely a delight to be in Dubai. I can assure you the weather here is a really refreshing change from London in late November, which is not so much fun. You know, Mike talked earlier about experience, didn't he? He talked about experience as a gateway to your success in the future. And what I want to talk about in the next half an hour is the way in which sound forms part of that experience, because we experience the world in 5 senses, not just one, don't we? Just a word on the Sound Agency. As David just said, we work for many major shopping malls around the world. You'll see some of the leading names up there, developers and owners and managers that we are working for. A very big project right now that we're on is the Mall of Scandinavia in Stockholm, something like 100,000 square meters of GLA. It's an enormous shopping mall, and it is absolutely dedicated to experience. They're going to have nodes there for earth, wind, fire, water, and each node will have an experience around that. I did write a book, and we do get quoted a lot in the world's media, and actually that's a side benefit of the work that we do very often for our clients, because media love sound. In fact, I found most people think sound is interesting when they start to think about it, and the media are no exception. So when we put sound into shopping malls and shops, it creates a lot of positive media interest. And yes, the TED Talks that I've been honoured to give have been seen something like 7 million times on the internet. And part of the content I'm going to give you today is in the very first of those TED Talks. Because what I want to talk about is the way sound affects us. Sound does profoundly affect us. However, there's an issue, because most of the sound around us is pretty unpleasant. You know, we stand on street corners shouting over noise like this and pretending that it doesn't exist. But it does. As a result of this constant suppression, we're in a habit of suppressing sound around us. Most of us have a relationship with sound that looks a little bit like this. We simply suppress it, we're not conscious of it, and yet it affects us in 4 very powerful ways, which I'm going to go through very quickly with you right now. Okay, that's a little shot of cortisol, your fight-flight hormone. Sorry about that. I can be more brutal than that. I hope if you have an alarm clock at home, it doesn't sound anything like that, because it's not good for you to wake up to a sudden sound like that. Sound does affect hormone secretions. It also affects your breathing, your heart rate, and even your brain waves. So here's a different sort of sound. If I put this on, surf, and leave it, if I were to leave this on for an hour or so, I think many of you would probably go to sleep. Surf is a very relaxing sound. It's roughly 12 cycles a minute. Very similar to the breathing of a sleeping human being, actually. And it's also a sound we associate with being on a beach, having no problems in the world. It's relaxing. A good sound if you have problems sleeping. That's the first way sound affects us physiologically. The second way, psychologically. This piece of music isn't going to make you feel happy. It wasn't designed to make you feel happy. Music carries a very strong emotional load. It has emotion built into it. Nobody quite knows how. There are many books on the subject. But it's not the only sound that has emotion in it. Birdsong, for example, is a sound that we use a great deal at the sound agency when we're working with clients, particularly in offices, because we've learned, all of us over hundreds of thousands of years, that when the birds are singing, things are okay. It's only if they suddenly stop that we get a nasty feeling, because that generally means something bad is about to happen. Also, birds are nature's alarm clock, time to be awake, so they tend to put us into a pretty good state, which is body relaxed, mind alert. A very good sound to use if you're trying to work. The third way sound affects us is cognitively. You can't understand two people talking at the same time, or in this case, one person talking twice. Not possible. Even a woman cannot understand two people talking at the same time. Sorry, but it's true, ladies. Actually, we have bandwidth for roughly 1.6 human conversations, which is why if you're working in an office that sounds like this, it can get very hard to concentrate, particularly if you're listening to one person's conversation out of all of that. In fact, this is the effect it can have. Now, I'm not against open plan offices per se. They have many wonderful features, but they're not very good if you're trying to do quiet work, if you're trying to use your brain, listen to your inner voice. We do need to allow a quiet working space for that, as well as the open plan space. So I'm sure the people sitting at the back are probably having a tougher time listening because of the noise coming from behind the curtain than the people here at the front. It's just a fact of life. We have limited bandwidth, and we get overloaded quite quickly if we have a lot of sound input. That factor is in play in retail very much. Actually, there's some quite interesting research by Professor Nancy Puccinelli at Oxford University, which is tending to indicate that we tend to overload people in retail. A lot of experience, a lot of the time, and if it's not coordinated, people go into overload and they go, I'm tired, I'm going home. Anyway, that's the third way sound affects us cognitively. And we don't want to overload people because generally, in retail, if I'm feeling clear and decisive, I'll buy things. If I'm overwhelmed, I go into a kind of fog. Good for gambling, not so good for shopping. Casinos want to put people in that fog, shops not so much. The fourth way sound affects us, of course, is behaviourally. This is the key one for retail. So ask yourself, for example, is this person going to drive at a steady 28 miles per hour? I suspect not. We all know that feeling, pumping music comes on in the car, we tend to drive a little bit faster. At the most simple level, we will move away from unpleasant sound if we can. So if I were to put this sound on and leave it for the rest of my presentation, most of you would understandably probably leave the room. I would. For people who can't get away from noise like that, the effects are devastating. The estimate is that in Europe alone, we're losing 1 million years of healthy life every year to traffic noise alone because of people having their sleep disturbed by traffic noise at night. So those are the 4 ways sound affects human beings. And for retail, the last one is the most important. Because if we make inappropriate noise in our shops, people will leave. They may not leave immediately, but they will leave faster than they would. And I don't have to educate this audience on the importance of dwell time. So a lot of what we do at the Sound Agency is orientated around increasing dwell time by creating ambiences, sound ambiences, that are comfortable, appropriate, and pleasant. We have a scientific model to do that. I don't have time to go through this model in great detail with you today, but you can see the 4 effects at the bottom of the screen that I just talked about. And when we run it this way, what we're doing is auditing. We're saying to a shopping mall, many of whom we work with now, we go in and audit and we say, this is the sound you're making. This is the environment, that's the center of that graph. The environment in terms of the noise, the background sound, the acoustics, the sound system, the people, the brand, everything else that should be factoring in. So this is the effect we're having on shoppers at the moment. Interesting when you turn that round and run it the other way. Because when we do this, what we do is say, if this is the kind of effect you want to have on people in this situation, then this is the kind of sound you need to design. And ladies and gentlemen, it is almost never mindless background music. The biggest fault that we find in shopping malls is the playing of generic, bland background music into an acoustic which is very, very live, Most shopping malls are big spaces, and they'll turn music into mush very quickly through a sound system that probably was originally designed simply for life safety, not for music at all. So you have an issue of quality, you have an issue of appropriateness, and often the music is quite quick. And as I've just explained to you, sound effects are rhythms. If you play fast-paced sound in a shop, people will move faster and leave faster. It's a common misunderstanding that you need to arouse people. That's often not the case. Now I get to this stage when I'm talking to brands, and they will often say, okay, that's interesting, maybe we'll do some sound next year. To which I say, there's a problem with that. You're already doing sound. Every brand is making sound right now. Every one of you who runs a retail presence, a branded space, or a branded business, you're making sound already. Was that sound designed? If not, it would be a minor miracle if it were actually positive, and a major miracle if it were optimal. In most cases, most brands are shooting themselves in the foot with incorrect sound, inappropriate sound every single day. The marketing landscape has changed, hasn't it? On the left-hand side of this chart, you see the old world, maybe 10 years ago. I mean, we've moved from that. It's no longer the case that we're moving. We have moved from the left side of this to the right side of this. You know this, we're in conversation. We have to deliver a brand experience which is actually congruent with the brand promise that we're making. It didn't used to be the case so much, but if you don't do that now, you get tweeted to death, you get Facebook to death. It is incredibly important for retail, and I would suggest that retailers probably need to focus on just these values more than any other. Creating a context, especially in shopping malls, a context for commerce. You have to deliver experience and community, those two things. Otherwise, why would people come out from behind Amazon? And that is what all of the mall operators that we know are doing, and that experience is in 5 senses. You're conscious of taste, because you're going upscale with your catering. You're conscious of visuals. You see some beautiful malls being developed now. Still, very many of them don't think about sound as a thing to design. And it's important because we buy on emotion. I like this quote from Pasikoff. He says he finds very few people who disagree with him by more than a few percentage points on this. I would suggest, if you think about the last time you bought something large, something that hurt a little bit, probably when you bought it, if you look at this graph, you were pretty much down there. Oops. Let me just go back one slide. Pretty much down there, in the non-conscious emotional part. When you bought that thing, there was something inside of you going, I want it. And then afterwards, we come out and we post-rationalize. Now it's interesting, I was speaking in Istanbul a week or two ago, and there were neuroscientists there, forerunners in the new science of neuromarketing, who were backing up exactly this. They said, this is what we do. We buy an emotion, and then we post-rationalize cognitively. Now, the reason this is important for this conversation is because the senses are gateways to emotions. This is a study that showed that emotional advertising is twice as effective as rational advertising. This is important. You need to be in an emotional conversation, not a rational conversation, or as well as a rational conversation, with your customers and your potential customers. And I would suggest that the senses are the gateways to the emotions. This is not based on research, this is a gut feeling guess. But if you think about vision, for example, which is how we take most of our information in, I'm not denigrating sight, it's an incredibly important sense. It's a very interpreted sense. I mean, you can close your eyes, you know where you're looking. And the optic nerve goes to the cortex, primarily, the interpretive part of the brain. However, hearing is our primary warning sense. If I want to warn you of something, I don't wave, I will shout. If a twig snaps behind you in a forest, you will spin round. It is far easier to upset people through their ears than through their eyes. You have no earlids. Think about it. Your hearing is working even while you sleep. If there's a strange noise in your house, you will wake up. So hearing is on all the time, and it has a very deep emotional impact because it's our primary warning sense. So does smell, by the way. That's another very important non-conscious emotional sense. Now, the reason this is important is because the senses affect one another. You cannot just concentrate on one. This is a new science, the science of cross-modal effects, how one sense affects another. Let me demonstrate that to you now. What I'd like you to do, please, is look at the screen and listen to what this guy is saying.
Ba 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 ba.
Now, most of you are hearing da-da.
Ba 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 ba.
Now close your eyes.
Ba 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 ba.
He's actually saying ba-ba. But when you look at the screen and then something on the video, he's saying ga-ga. Your eyes see ga-ga, your ears hear ba-ba, and your brain says that's da-da.
Ba 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 ba.
You cannot override this. If you look at the screen, you hear da-da. If you close your eyes, you can hear he's actually saying ba-ba. So that proves to you that what you hear is not necessarily real. It also proves that the senses affect one another. Here's another interesting example. They put headphones on people eating crisps. And they change, without telling them, they change the sound of the crisp eating by boosting a treble frequency. The result was that people reported that the crisps were 15% crunchier in their mouth because the sound had gotten treble. Another example of cross-modal effects, and this is with packaging. I doubt many people in this room are using this product, but it is highly used by the younger generation. When CFCs were banned a few years ago, you know the chemical that used to be in aerosols? That packaging went from going to going, and the customers were complaining that the product was no longer working. It wasn't as strong as it used to be. So they spent a lot of money at Axe or Lynx re-engineering the packaging so that without CFCs again, it goes and it's working fine again. So the sound of the packaging affects how well people think the product is working. Cross-modal effects. Now, when you line these cross-modal effects up using what we call congruence, you get a thing called super additivity. Super additivity. And in the world of the senses, 1 plus 1 is not 2. 1 plus 1 can be a much bigger number than that. So, for example, if you add a congruent sound to a visual stimulus, you get an increase of something like 1100% according to the neurological research. That's 12 times the impact of your communication. On the other hand, if you add an incongruent sound to your visual stimulus, then you're down to something like 14% of what you started with. Now, the example I always use for this one is, think about your local supermarket. Do you want to hang out there? Probably not. Does it look awful? No. They're pretty well designed spaces now. Does it smell awful? No, because they now know about pumping freshly baked bread smells in from the in-store bakery. It does, however, sound dreadful. You have trolley rattles, buzzes from chiller cabinets, hums, babies crying, clashes, terrible acoustics. That's why you don't want to hang out there. That's why we all go in and do a commando raid and get out as fast as possible. That is the effect that's in play, because the sound is undermining all of the money that's being spent on the other senses in those spaces. Unfortunately, over the years, the marketing profession has been obsessed with these. And in fact, it's been shown that roughly 83% of the world's marketing spend is focused on the eyes. Now, here's that 83% represented in the green bars on this chart. The blue bars are what you get, and this is from the brand sense study that was done by Millward Brown a decade or so ago. The blue bars are what you get if you ask people which sense is most important to them in their relationship with the world. Now, there's a mismatch there, isn't there? And that creates a great opportunity, I would say, around where that red bar is. Now, I can hear you thinking immediately, yes, but what about smell? Absolutely. But sight and sound are the two major senses, because you can broadcast sight and sound, and you can say specific things. And in fact, I would argue that the A in AV is significantly more important, because you could close your eyes right now and you'd be receiving the vast majority of my presentation without necessarily looking at the slides. So sound alone would carry a great deal of information. On the other hand, is not so effective, is it? And that's a mistake that's often made in boardrooms, incidentally, where somebody invests a huge amount in an enormous screen, and then there's one microphone in an echoey room in the middle of a table for 20 people, and people wonder why they can't communicate. Sound is more important than vision for distant communication, without any doubt. We have identified 8 ways in which brands express themselves in sound. We have become, over the last few years, specialists in soundscapes and physical spaces, especially retail. But there are many other ways. Now, I don't have time to go right round this wheel with you, but I would suggest those of you in charge of brands seriously think about creating some guidelines. I've many times had the conversation, I had it only yesterday here in Dubai with a very major brand here. Do you have a brand book? Yes, we have a brand book. How many pages are about sound? None. That's interesting, isn't it? We all need guidelines for how we sound. And these are the 8 ways. I'll just touch on a couple of them. Let me mention brand voice, because many of you will be in businesses which interact with people in voice. I'm not talking about here, it's not tone of voice, this is not a metaphor, I mean literally physically voice. The first time I got on a Virgin Atlantic aeroplane, many years ago, the stewardess said, "Hello, sexy." I remember this very well because it's the only time anybody's ever said that to me. Also because it was a surprise. Now, had she been working for British Airways, she would have probably been sacked for saying that. Working for Virgin, it was perfect. At that time, it was a cheeky, irreverent challenger brand. It was informal, it was young, it was bumptious. And that was expressed in 2 words perfectly. I don't think anybody told her to say that, but I think she understood the brand voice. So the question for your brands, is your brand voice old or young? Is it formal or informal?